So let me give you a little overview of Abraham, the time of Abraham, the next historical thing we go to. Again, based on the chronology that I'm following, Abraham was born in southern Mesopotamia, in Ur, around 2166 BC. About 2091, he enters Canaan in obedience to God. And about 2080, Ishmael was born to Hagar. 2067, about this time, Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed. 2066, Isaac is born to Sarah and Gerar. 2051, Isaac is taken to Mount Moriah, Jerusalem. And then in 2029, Sarah dies at Hebron at the age of 127. When eventually Abraham dies in 1991 BC at Hebron. Again, this is the general time frame. Again, these dates are not arbitrary. They're based on internal evidence in the text itself. They're also based on the Exodus date of 1446 BC, which is based on a couple of texts, Leviticus, the Jubilee cycles in Leviticus, and then also 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, that talks about the Exodus happening 480 years after, or excuse me, yeah, the Exodus took place 400 years prior to the laying of the foundations of Solomon's temple. And so, so based on this chronology, we were able to reconstruct internally in the text itself when we believe Abraham would have lived in Mesopotamia. And when we look at those times, the historical time periods dovetail very well with what we know of the text in Abraham. It actually matches very well. So if we're going to find Abraham in the archaeological record, where do we begin? Well, the scripture says that he was from Ur of the Chaldees. He was also went up to Haran. There's something called the Amorite Hypothesis I'll tell you about in a second. Also, we have possible historical inscriptions related to Abraham. We have not found his name. His name does exist in the ancient world, but we have not found what we believe is the Abraham. So we'll look at Abraham, the historical inscriptions, and then also the possible location of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then the Camel anachronism, we probably won't have time to get to it. So the rise of the city-states in Mesopotamia, again, to kind of review, Eridu would have been the location of the Tower of Babel. It's known also as Kish, that's mentioned in the Well-Blundell prism. And by the way, I have a theory about, I have not really shared this publicly quite a lot. I don't think I've ever shared this publicly. So it's not completely harebrained, but I think it's there's some plausibility to this. But there's some debate among archaeologists, Assyriologists, as to the exact function of the ziggurats. So when I say ziggurat, again, I'm talking about the step temple. We know that it sort of maybe symbolized a mountain, and that there was sort of a building on top. Exactly what the function of the building was, we don't know. If there was a priest in it or if they left offerings in it, we don't really know. And I don't really, again, there's no inscriptions that really say. But what I conjecture, my educated guess, is that if there was a global flood, and if Noah's Ark did survive somewhat intact, and we know from the Epic of Gilgamesh, and we also know from the myth of Atrahasis, again, I think they do contain some kernels of truth in them, even though they are old and corrupted. I do think they can still contain some elements of truth in them. Gilgamesh actually goes to the Babylonian version of Noah, a guy by the name of Utnapishtim, to seek the secret of eternal life. Noah survived the flood, and he was a really old man. So could the ziggurat be a symbol of Mount Ararat, and the thing on top of it, the symbol of the ark, and that the function of the ziggurat was to somehow, through some kind of magical means, try to, earn favor with the gods to have eternal life? The text doesn't really say. The text just says that they wanted to make a name for themselves, and they wanted to reach up a tower to reach the heavens. Just conjecture on my part, but I do think it makes a lot of sense. And we also know that the ziggurat was the precursor to the pyramid in Egypt, and the original pyramids would have been whitewashed to look like a snowy mountain. So pretty cool. Just a thought. You guys can think on that. Let me know what you think about it. Then we have Uruk, another very old city. Historic Gilgamesh was a king from Uruk. We do believe that there was an element of truth in the Gilgamesh epic story. Then Akkad, Sargon of Akkad was, again, the biblical Nimrod. He united Akkadian and Sumerian speaking peoples in Mesopotamia. And this would have been the old Akkadian Empire. Just to show you, you can see there on the map there, Eridu, right there in the south, right below Ur. See how close it is? By the way, I didn't mention this. Eridu was built on virgin sand. There's no, the earliest layers of Eridu, there's no earlier occupation of Eridu. It's just, it's the oldest city in the world. So pretty cool. And so, yeah, Sargon united all the Sumerian people. And this is what many scholars believe to be one of the early bronze carvings of Sargon the Great. His eye looks like it's been gouged out, but this would have very, very likely been the biblical Nimrod. Pretty cool stuff. I think we've already looked at this, some of the names, some of the kings. He was the founder of the Sargonic dynasty, Sargon of Akkad. Little interesting footnote, much later in Neo-Assyrian history, there was a king by the name of Sargon II. He named himself after the Sargon of Akkad, the great Sargon, and he was the father of Sennacherib. Sennacherib, you might remember, was the king that lived during the time of Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah. And he was the one to sack Lachish and to also surround and besiege Jerusalem. That would have been, and this is also in the archaeological record. We see the Sennacherib prism. We also see evidence of the siege of Jerusalem and also Lachish, or not Jerusalem, but Lachish on the palace walls of Nineveh. So he would have been named, he named himself in honor of Sargon I. Sargon II did. That was the father of Sennacherib. Ur-Nammu left, again, this is kind of review. I'm going to jump through this. Ur of the Chaldees, Ur-Kasdim, or Tel el-Maqatir, first identified in 1849 by Henry Rawlinson via bricks from a guy named William of Loftus. He brought to London. The site was visited. We have record of the site of Ur being visited by Europeans as early as 1625. It was excavated between 1922 and 1934 by Sirlinda Wooley at the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania. By the way, Leonard Wooley was a colleague of another very famous American archaeologist by the name of T.E. Lawrence, Thomas Edward Lawrence, who you may know as Lawrence of Arabia. And T.E. Lawrence was a sort of a colleague of Leonard Wooley and excavated there. This is a really cool photograph of artist rendition of what the temple or ziggurat of Ur-Nammu looked like. And another little, again, mimicking possibly a mountain, you notice that the stairs all are in the cardinal directions. They go out to the right and the left. And what's interesting is that in the land of Urartu, in where Eastern Turkey is today, where Mount Ararat is, the local people call it the place of descent. It's the place where Noah and his descendants would have descended from the mountain. So again, just some food for thought as to the possible functions of the ziggurat, maybe perhaps as a faint remnant memory of this event in which the descendants of Noah came down off Mount Ararat. This is actually what it looks like today. This is the remnants of it. So it's fairly well preserved. You can see it's the base of it is still intact pretty well. Let's see here. Yeah, what time? Okay. So what I'll do is I'm going to show you guys a few more slides and then I'll stop because I'm getting a little hoarse from talking. I did an earlier presentation today, so I've been talking for quite a while. But Abraham and his culture, this is a really great quote from Dr. Eugene Merrill. Abraham and Ur of Terah and Abraham was quite cosmopolitan for non-Sumerians such as Abraham's own Semitic ancestors, lived there and mingled their intellectual and cultural traditions with those of the Sumerians. Since by that time Sargon had created the Semite-dominated Akkadian Empire at Agad, nearly 200 miles northwest of Ur, Abraham was most certainly bilingual, commanding both Sumerian and Akkadian languages. So he couldn't speak Hebrew because there was no Hebrew at the time. Hebrew was very likely invented during the sojourn when the Israelites were in Egypt. And for more information on that theory, you need to check out my video, but with Dr. Doug Petrovich on Epic Archaeology YouTube channel. It's the episode, I think 2 or 3, I forgot which one it is, but it's the Hebrew as the first consonantal language, very likely invented by Joseph himself, the boy who was sold into slavery, invented Hebrew language, and it was the first consonantal language. So Abraham would not have spoken Hebrew, he would have spoken Sumerian and Akkadian. This is a really cool black and white picture of Sirlinda Wooley at Ur, digging in his knee socks and wool jacket. Pretty cool. This is one of my favorite objects from Ur. This is the royal standard of Ur. It's early dynastic period. It predates Abraham by several centuries, but it shows you the culture in which Abraham came from. Very beautiful lapis lazuli inlay with gold and ivory. This would have been in the royal standard of Ur. And then also discovered by Leonard Woolley was this beautiful lyre of Ur, this beautiful musical instrument. So again, the Sumerians were very cultured and had a very high developed art tradition. Another interesting fact about Abraham, where he came from, the primary deity worshipped at Ur was the Sumerian moon god Nana, also known as Nanar, and in Akkadian as Sin or Inzu. So it's very likely that Abraham and his family were devotees of the very early, very same Sumerian moon god. There's also a potential connection between Terah, this is Abraham's father, Terah's name as a form of the Hebrew word Yereah, or moon. So Terah's name indicating his very devotion and affiliation. And this is actually in the bottom, you can see there a cylinder seal of the worship of Nana, the moon god. So pretty cool connection there. God called Abraham out of a pagan culture and called him to himself, and he left Ur of the Chaldees and worshiping other gods to worship God, the one God, Yahweh. So in 2091, he leaves Ur for Canaan. He goes at the end of the 3rd millennium BC, sometime beginning of the 3rd dynasty of Ur. He goes, and in fact, when this happened, Ur fell, and there is a really good lamentation, a good inscription that you can read on the lamentation of Ur. I'm going to jump ahead here. Sorry, I'm going fast. I'm trying to wrap this up. This is a map showing you the Ur III Empire at its height. You can see there Ur at the very bottom, right near the Persian Gulf. And what I want you to see here is how far this is. So the bottom finger is pointing to Ur. The top finger is pointing to Haran. Did you notice how far Haran is? It's way up in Turkey. And do you know how long this is? This is 600 miles. So when Abraham went to Haran, he traveled 600 miles. This, and also, I also on this photograph, I actually put a little symbol there for Mount Ararat. That's approximately where Mount Ararat is. So it's very interesting that Abraham was living in an area culturally in which he could have gleaned information about the flood because it was in fairly close proximity to Mount Ararat. I don't like super close, but within a couple of days' journey. So it was in Haran that Abraham met up with a group called the Amorites, and this is known as the Amorite Hypothesis. Haran was populated with a group called the Martu by the Sumerians and the Amuru, which are the biblical Amorites. They were becoming the predominant people group in that time frame. So again, very likely Abraham became conversant in Amorite and Semitic dialects, and he also became familiar with semi-nomadism by the Sumerians or the Amorites as well. So basically living as you travel, because they had overgrown many of the city-states that they were in, and they were looking for new land. And so the Amorite hypothesis, I don't know if I got a slide for it, yeah, is the question of whether or not Abraham migrated south into Canaan with the Amorites. He could have went with the Amorites, or God could have told him to go by himself. I sort of tend to follow the latter view, but it doesn't affect it either way. Either way, Abraham goes down into Canaan, and we know that the Amorites also went down there as well. So he could have either went with the Amorites or he could have went by himself. We do know that there were massive people groups that were going south into Canaan. So let's see here. Hattusha, the capital of the Hittite Empire, was discovered in 1906 by the German archaeologist Hugo Winkler, and then eventually an entire library was discovered, 10,000 clay tablets written in Akkadian, Hittite, and Sumerian. In the Hittite Library, you find the Hittite legal code, written about 1300 BC. This is a photograph of the site of Hattusha in Turkey, and this would have been the capital of the Hittite Empire. What's interesting about this is that in the Hittite legal code, it illuminates some of the cultural things that we see with Abraham. This is a quote from Gleason Archer, one of my heroes in Old Testament scholarship. He says, the Hittite legal code illuminates the transaction recorded in Genesis 23, where Abraham purchased the cave of Machpelah from the Hittite, I forgot the guy's name, I can't read it. Hittite logs explain the reluctance of Abraham to buy the entire parcel and his preference for acquiring the cave itself and the territory immediately adjacent to it. The law required the owner of the entire tract to perform the ritual duties of ilku, or feudal service, a responsibility doubtless included pagan religious observances. So as a Jehovah worshiper, Abraham would have been alert enough to prevent and avoid involvement by purchasing only a fraction of the parcel, leaving thus Ephron, that's his name, Ephron, responsible to perform the ilku, but because he was the original owner of the tract of land. So basically, this practice of dedicating the land to a foreign god, why did Abraham just buy part of it? Well, this explains why he would have bought part of it, because if he bought the whole thing, he would have been required under Hittite legal code, or at least that was the law of the land of the day, which very likely predates the Hittite discovery, that he would have had to perform this pagan ritual for having the land. So pretty cool. And then also Nuzi, Yorgan Tepe, located 12 miles southwest of the modern Kirkuk in Iraq. It was excavated in 1925 and 1931. Excavations yielded about 5,000 clay tablets from the Hurrian era, written in Akkadian. The Nuzi tablets describe, again, many social, economic, legal, and administrative affairs of the time. And the Nuzi inscriptions, like the other inscriptions, the Hittite legal code, confirm and illuminate customs and backgrounds of the biblical patriarchs, including Abraham, as well as possibly Job as well. This is a photograph of a cuneiform tablet from Nuzi, Middle Babylonian. It's in Akkadian. This is actually in the Harvard Semitic Museum in Cambridge. So let's see here. The selling of a birthright. In Genesis 12, verses 2 through 5, Abraham is referenced to Eleazar as the son of his house. The selling of birthrights was a common practice in the ancient Near East, and the Nuzi tablets actually give us insight into that. Also, the provision for a surrogate to produce offspring for an heir. So there were also laws in place that if your wife was not able to provide a male offspring, then the law of the land said that you could actually, the wife could provide a surrogate. So this explains why Sarah offered a Hagar, is it Hagar? Yeah, as the surrogate for Abraham to have the child. But of course, God was not going to use Hagar. He was going to use Abraham and Sarah. But what this shows us in these Nuzi tablets is that it shows what they were thinking. They were following the practices of the day. So, and then one other thing is Genesis 31, a plausible motive for Rachel's theft of her father's teraphim, or household gods. Whoever owned the household gods had the inheritance. So this again explains why that would be the case. And we actually have evidence of these clay teraphim portraying fertility goddesses all throughout there. In fact, we find these in the earliest archaeological layers in the ancient world. We find clay fertility figurines that have female forms. You can see the figures there, very kind of graphically displayed. But this explains why Rachel would have taken the teraphim, because whoever had the teraphim would have actually had the inheritance.